Let's start this time with a word of prayer. Oh God, you are so good and kind to us. Continue to give us wisdom in studying, give us good connection. Thank you for your love and work in our lives. You are so good and kind. May we always live in your light. Take care of us and our loved ones. Help us in our specific needs. All these we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, so you learned about innatism, and innatism believes that it's the brain that drives language learning with minimal input from the environment. I should not have drank that cold water, that cold drink. So Krashen's five hypothesis is under the innatism school of thought, and Krashen came up with five hypotheses. Krashen's five hypotheses are actually very popular. And here's the first one. His first hypothesis is the acquisition learning distinction. According to Krashen, there's a difference between language acquisition and language learning. Language acquisition is like learning language in an in a natural setting, not in a classroom, not by being taught the language, but by participating in language. On the other hand, language learning is learning language in a school with all the rules being taught to you. By the way, class, in the Innatism school of thought, the primacy is of grammar. Grammar is the primary consideration. So many entities think that if you acquire the grammar, you have acquired the language. Language learning is grammar learning. That's for them. So for Krashen, there's a difference between language acquisition and language learning. In acquisition, It's a process similar to the way young children learn their language, their first language. Young children do not learn a language by learning the rules explicitly. Rather, they acquire the language by actually using the language to communicate. So, your nephew, your niece, the children of your friends, very young, they don't learn language by being taught the rules of the language. Rather, they acquire language subconsciously. They acquire the language by using the language subconsciously, not by learning explicitly. Classes like riding a bicycle. You ride a bicycle, you don't know, you fail. You ride a bicycle, you fail. It's not really the training, it's not really the practice, rather it's the subconscious learning of balance. So class, in my son's case, I kept teaching him, I kept teaching him, I kept teaching him. He didn't learn to ride a bicycle. And then all of a sudden he learned to ride a bicycle. All of a sudden he was subconsciously able to balance himself. He learned to ride a bicycle not by being taught the rules of language, of riding a bicycle. All of a sudden my son learned to ride a bicycle. All of a sudden, my son learned to balance himself. Imagine that. The same thing among you. Could you give? Is there a bicycle? Is there a bicycle emotion there? Could you give a smiling face if you know how to ride a bicycle? Type type a smiling face if you know how to ride a bike. One, two, three, four, five, six, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Hindi pwede yung apat ang gulong na bicycle. Hindi bicycle yon. Okay? May trainer wheels. May trainer wheels. Okay? Ayun. Ayun. So, pag two wheels lang, all of a sudden, hindi ka marunong. When I tried learning to ride a bicycle, I kept on remembering all the rules my friends taught me, but they didn't really work. And then all of a sudden I learned to ride a bicycle subconsciously. I don't know what changed. So that's the same thing about language acquisition. According to Krashen, it's a subconscious process. It's subconscious. Learners are not aware that they're acquiring language but are using it for communication. So you use language to communicate. You use the very little language that you know to communicate, and then you build it upon it, you build upon it, you build upon it, and then later on, you have acquired the language. Acquisition is implicit learning. It's informal learning. It's natural learning. It's not in a school context. It's picking up a language. That's how children acquire language. They pick it up, they have natural learning. Now, adults can actually acquire also. Disability does not end at puberty, but it does not mean that adults will always achieve native like fluency, unlike children who acquire language at a young age, unlike you. Adults can also access the language acquisition device. We studied language acquisition device under innatism, and we said that the language acquisition device also atrophies. It deteriorates, it grows old, naluluma. So adults who access the language acquisition device don't benefit so much from it as children who access it at a young age. So adults don't always achieve native like fluency. So language acquisition has to do with accessing the language acquisition device. Okay? So according to Initis, error correction actually has little effect on acquisition. You correct a child's grammar, they will still continue with their own grammar. Class, when I correct my daughter, hindi yun nagkain, kumain. So she ended up saying nagkumain. Nagkumain na po ako, daddy. Nagkumain ako, daddy. And then sabi niya later sa mami niya, Mami, nagtumae ako nung English time. Nagkumain. So I keep on correcting her, but it has little effect. When she is, I think when she is paying attention to the form of her language, yes, she gets the correct version, the correct grammar. But when she's not focusing on her language, when she's focusing on the task, on the communication, she reverts to her competence. Competence is what you actually know. Okay? Okay, now class, several researchers found that parents correct only a small portion of children's language. They don't really correct much of their children's language. They correct only the occasional pronunciation problems, certain verbs, and dirty words. Okay, it's actually parents don't really correct much of their children's language, particularly grammar. They don't really correct grammar. So, according to the researchers, parents attend far more to the truth value of what the child is saying rather than to the form. For example, if a child says, her curl my hair, they don't correct that. Parents don't correct that. But when a child says, Walt Disney comes on Tuesday, no, honey, Walt Disney comes on Wednesdays. So it's the truth value that they correct. Parents don't really correct grammar. Okay, so we have acquisition, it's a subconscious process. Then we also have learning. Learning involves conscious knowledge of the rules, subject verb agreement, tag questions, tense and aspect. Those are conscious knowledge of rules. Language learning, in contrast to language acquisition, is knowing about the language. It's explicit learning of the rules. And according to Krashen, error correction supposedly has an effect on learning. So, for example, he has a car, hasn't he? Or he has a car, doesn't he? Please type into the chat the correct tag question. Okay, doesn't he? Doesn't he? Yes, that's the correct answer, doesn't he? You know, class, I have not acquired tag questions. I have learned tag questions, but I have not acquired tag questions. When I'm paying attention to my language, I am able to give the correct tag question. But when I'm focusing on the communication, I revert back to my competence. I use the wrong tag question. So if I'm watching my language, I would say he's here, isn't he? He's here, isn't he? But if I'm not paying attention to my language, I'm focusing on the task, I would say, he's here, is he? He's here, is he? So I have not acquired tag questions. I have learned tag questions, but I have not acquired tag questions. The second hypothesis is natural order. Language learners go through specific stages. The acquisition of grammatical structures proceeds in a predictable order. And so the illustration I use here is that of the butterfly. All butterflies go through the same stages, from an egg to a caterpillar to a pupa to a mature butterfly. It doesn't matter what your first language is. You may be a Korean speaker, a German speaker, an Arabic speaker, a Filipino speaker. All of those speakers go through the same stages in learning English. So, according to Krashen, acquirers of a given language tend to acquire certain grammatical structures early and others later. There are grammar structures that are acquired early. There are grammar structures that are learned or acquired later. For example, in the case of the passive voice, young children, grade 1 to grade 2, they don't acquire. They're unable to acquire passive. I think it takes up until it takes grade 6 before a child acquires passive. Maybe they learn the passive, but they don't acquire the passive. When they're paying attention to their language, they use the passive, but when they are focusing on the task, no, they don't use the passive. Can you give a sample of a passive sentence? Type a passive sentence, a short passive sentence into the chat box. Okay, let's see. The cake was eaten by the girl. Correct. She sat quietly. That's active. The wolf tried to eat the bone. That's active. The boy was hit by a car. That's correct. The lesson was explained by the teacher. Correct. The exam was perfectly answered by the girl. Correct. Passive. He was eaten by the werewolf. Passive. Yes. The desks were arranged in rows. Correct. The gift was given by her teacher. The passive voice class, the rule is the subject is the receiver of the action. The subject is the receiver of the action. And if you teach that to young children, they might learn that, but they will not acquire that. So if they are careful with their language, they might use that, but they if they focus on the communication, they won't be able to. They won't use that. It will take them a certain amount of maturity before they learn. Okay, a certain amount of language learning before they acquire it. It's later, not before. Okay, so some researchers have actually studied acquisition, and they found that there are. Okay, you may go. Okay, so for stage, they differ. God bless you. All language learners go through similar stages. So at the first stage, they learn the case, they acquire the case, they acquire the word order. Second stage, they acquire the singular copula is and the singular auxiliary is. They also acquire the are and the progressive ing. At stage three, they learn the past irregular, the possessive, the would, and the long plural s. And at stage four, they learn how to use have plus n, have eaten, have taken. So that's according to the research of Dulay and Burt. So according to researchers, the agreement among individual acquirers is not always 100%, but there are clear statistically significant similarities. So all language learners go through the same natural order. And the third hypothesis is the monitor hypothesis. If you look at this, you have acquired competence, and then this is what's in your brain, the acquired competence. And then you use what you acquired along with what you consciously acquired, what you consciously learned. And then out of your mouth goes the output. In other words, learners have the ability to watch their language. Okay? What they have internally, they they monitor, they keep track of, they watch using the rules that they have explicitly learned. So when you monitor, you apply the rules that you have learned. So this happens when you are focusing on the form. So notice some speakers, when they speak English, they keep on correcting themselves. For example, I am in the on the bus. So you say I'm on the bus. because that's the correct grammar. I'm on the bus. But then you say sometimes, I'm in the on the bus. When you correct yourself, or you watch your language carefully, that's monitor. Okay? The monitor is used only when three conditions are present: time, focus on form, and you consciously know the rules. If you have enough time to focus on the form, you are careful. You are careful about your language, and you consciously know the rules. So when you have enough time to do the monitoring and you focus on the form, surface, form of what you're saying, the one that goes out of your mouth, and you consciously know the rules, then you're able to monitor. But if you don't have enough time, you're not focusing, or you're not focusing on the form, you're focusing on the communication, or you don't consciously know the rule, that's the time that you're unable to use the monitor. So in simple terms, the monitor is carefully watching your speech. The monitor is carefully paying attention to your speech. So when you use the monitor, you carefully pay attention to your speech. And that happens only when you have time, when you're focusing on the form, and you consciously know the rules. Otherwise, you end up going back to your existing competence. So, class, for example, if I have a memorized speech in French, that's not my competence. My competence is what I have internalized about French. So sometimes you can speak French even without using your competence or beyond your competence. That's when you memorize something. When you memorize the sentences in French, you're able to communicate beyond your competence. Okay? And that's when you monitor. Otherwise, if you don't use your monitor, you fall back on what is called your competence, what you actually have acquired regarding the language. That's your competence. So, the monitor enables speakers to use forms that are not yet acquired. So, when you memorize French sentences, you are able to use forms that you have not yet acquired because you are watching your language. Okay, there are three types of monitor users. First is the overuser. The overuser may be too exposed to grammar teaching. They're insecure about trusting what they have acquired. They're insecure about trusting acquired system. An example of these are Japanese. Japanese would say, I is am go, going to to the clinic. So they really watch their language. They're overusers of the monitor. On the other hand, we have the underuser. They rely completely on the acquired system. Examples of these are Hispanics. Hello? What happened? Okay, three types of monitor users. First are the overusers, like the Japanese. They focus too much on the learned rules. Then you have the underusers. They don't use explicit rules. They rely completely on what they have acquired. They would just talk and talk and talk and talk, not caring whether they're ungrammatical or not. And then there are optimal users. They use the monitor only when necessary to produce correct form without impeding communication. Okay, they use the monitor, they use their learned rules. They use the rules they have learned explicitly only when necessary without impeding communication. You see, sometimes if you keep on using the if you keep on using the explicit rules, you end up stammering and you impede communication. And if you don't use the rules, you just keep on talking based on your acquired competence. Sometimes your competence is still incorrect, and that produces miscommunication. So you use optimal users use the learned rules. They pay attention to the surface form, the form, only when it does not impede communication. And then we now have the fourth hypothesis, which is the most important hypothesis. This is the input hypothesis. According to Krashen, a learner acquires a language through comprehensible input. Class, if you are stuck in an island, you have uh, you have a radio that's stuck on a Chinese channel. You listen to it all day, you will still not learn Chinese. Why? Because there's no extra linguistic information. What you hear is not comprehensible. Okay? A learner acquires a language through comprehensible input. Class, if we have this face to face, what we will do right now would be I will teach you three words in Burmese. I will do like this. Chaba. Come on. Chaba. 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 Come on. Chaba. Chaba. Everybody. Chaba. Yeah. And you would all stand up. And then I would say, Taiba. 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 And then you would all sit down. Then I would again say, Chaba. 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 And you stand up. And then eventually you get the idea that the word chaba in Burmese means to stand up. And then I would say, Lepad Lepad. And you would all turn around. And you would all turn around. And then without actions, I would start saying, I would say, Taiba. And you would sit down. And I would say again, Chaba. And you would stand up. And I would point to somebody, Lebadba. And they would turn around. So how did you get to learn the meaning of the words Chaba, Taiba, and Lebadba? How did you learn? through extralinguistic information. In other words, the input is comprehensible. So according to Krashen, a learner acquires a language through comprehensible input. Input with additional clues. Input with extralinguistic information. So that's how a learner acquires a language, through comprehensible input. Okay? According to Stephen Krashen, comprehensible input is I plus 1. I is what you know. I plus 1 are skills that are just a little bit beyond your present set of skills. Again, comprehensible input is equal to I plus 1. I is what you already know. I plus 1 are the set of skills that are just a little beyond your present skills. Okay, so have you heard of that in your Prof Ed courses? Skills that are just a little beyond your present set of skills. What do you call that in Prof Ed? The skills that are just beyond the set of skills that are just beyond your present set of skills. What do you call that in Prof Ed? I'll give you a clue. It came from Lev Vygotsky. What is the term that Lev Vygotsky used to refer to that set of skills that are just a little beyond your present set of skills? According to Lev Vygotsky. Type it in the chat box if you know. What are those set of skills that are just beyond your... Very good, Eloisa. The ZOPED. The ZOPED. The zone of proximal development. So very good, Eloisa. It's actually the ZOPED. The zone of proximal development. Pag sinabing proximal, the word proximal means near. Again, the word proximal means near. So the zone of proximal development is the set of skills that are just a little beyond your present set of skills. Your present set of skills is actually called the zone of actual development, ZAD. The present set of skills that you have is the zone of actual development. The set of skills that are just a little bit beyond your capabilities, that's called the ZOPED, the zone of proximal development. So for Lev Vygotsky, it's called zone of actual development. Your present set of skills, Lev Vygotsky calls that the zone of actual development, your present set of skills. For Krashen, the term he uses is I. So for Lev Vygotsky, the set of skills that are just a little beyond your capable of your actual skills, that's the zone of proximal development. For Stephen Krashen, it's called I plus 1. Okay, we'll probably end here. Wait. Hanggang 5 pa pala tayo, ano? Sige, we'll end here na lang. Baka masyado nang mabigat kasi para sa inyo yung lesson eh. Okay, ito na lang pala, ito na lang. This is similar to Levygotsky's zone of proximal development. This zone contains content that's just a little beyond a learner's capability. This content cannot be learned by a learner through practice but only through aid from a much more knowledgeable person. Ay! Dito pala ako magkukwento. Class. Class, dito pala ako magkukwento, class. Dito tayo magtapos sa kwento na to. Yung nanay ko, ano yan, yung nanay ko, English teacher din yan nung several decades ago. Wala pang wala pang sine. Wala pang TV nung panahon ng nanay ko. Yung English nila, natutunan nila sa pamamagitan ng reading, textbooks. Pagbabasa ng textbooks, Pero may problema yung nanay ko at saka yung yung mga kasama niyang English learners, English teachers. Hindi nila alam yung English para sa aray. They don't know the English for ouch. Hindi nila alam yun. Kasi wala sa libro yun eh. Wala sa libro yung English para sa aray. And no matter how they practice, they cannot learn the English for aray. Kahit na mag-practice pa sila na mag-practice, hindi nila malalaman yung English ng aray. Ano ang kailangan? They need somebody much more knowledgeable. I'm sure sa ZOPED ninyo, sa Prof Ed ninyo, tinuturuan kayo sa Prof Ed courses ninyo, sinasabihan kayo, yung bata, meron siyang skills na hindi niya kayang matutunan unless tulungan siya ng adult. Kaya ito yung sinabi, this content cannot be learned by a learner through practice but only through aid from a much more knowledgeable person. Tayo kasi, nakakapanood tayo ng TV. And in that TV, in that video, there's a much more knowledgeable person. And we learned that the English word for ouch, natutunan natin na ang English ng aray ay ouch. Okay? Katawa-tawa yung mga nanay ko, kinukwento niya. Hindi niya daw nila alam yung English word for ouch, for aray. Nag-imbento sila. Sabi nila, ang English ng aray ay arroy. Arroy or array. Array. O yun daw ang English word ng aray. Array. Arroy, array. Okay? So hindi nila alam na ouch. And no matter how much they practice, hindi nila matututunan. They need a much more knowledgeable person to tell them. So yun. Okay? Yun ang zone of proximal development. Yun ang I+1. Okay, thank you very much, class. Do you have a question? Do you have questions? By the way, class, our quiz will be on October 3, and I will modify the LMS to show the correct answers for the quizzes. Okay, so yun. 40 items ang midterms, October 3. 30 minutes to answer. Closed notes. And the coverage is everything that we discussed before the midterm. Okay. So if you have any additional questions, may naisip pala kayong question, post nyo sa GC natin. Okay. So if you have no more questions, then thank you very much and goodbye. Bye-bye.